We've seen enough NBA so far this year to know that there's quite a few players that definitely need to be traded to make their team better. And the first one belongs to the Golden State Warriors, which is tough because it could go so many ways. Their team needs to get better, so should they trade Draymond, Klay Thompson, or Andrew Wiggins? It should definitely be one of them because they need to do everything they can to not waste Steph Curry's last few years in his prime. And all are tricky because, well, Draymond's now a two-sport athlete, and with how bad Klay and Wiggins have been, they're barely even playing one. So all these players' values are at all-time lows. It's really up in the air, but I'll lay out a trade scenario for each. If they trade Draymond Green, I think the best case scenario would be to center the deal around Grant Williams from the Mavericks. He's a very similar defensive player that's much younger and a way better shooter. He'd fit perfectly into the Warriors system. It would work both ways for the Mavs too, because if you pair Draymond up with another star point guard like Luka, I think you'd get a similar effect and probably succeed. And he'd be the veteran and leader on defense that team would need. The choice to trade Klay Thompson is a tricky one because while I think they should definitely consider it, he's also in the last year of his $200 million contract. So with his value being at an all-time low and Golden State being such a desired place to play, maybe they could just get more value in free agency. That is, unless they were able to trade Klay Thompson in a deal around Zach LaVine, because that deal would give them everything they've wanted and needed. A guy that can go get his own shot and shoot nearly 40% from three. He's not the best defender, but the Warriors have plenty of perimeter defenders to make up for him. If Golden State somehow made this happen, it could save their season. It could also work for Chicago too, because if there were some added draft picks or a younger player like Moses Moody thrown in the deal, it would give them young talent and at the same time get Zach LaVine's 3-year $120 million contract off their payroll too, so it's a win-win. Then if they were to trade Andrew Wiggins, well, he's kind of the wild card here because he's still only 28 and we've seen his potential. I could see a deal centered around him and a young player, attracting offers centered around guys like Jeremy Grant, OG Anunoby, or Pascal Siakam. All three would be dream scenarios for the Warriors, and they might not be the most likely, but they're still possible. But enough about the Warriors. Let's talk about a team with another star point guard that's still struggling in the Atlanta Hawks. I mean, this Hawks team is still bad. They started missing the playoffs, so they brought in DeJounte Murray, who was supposed to save the day and make them contenders again, and they arguably got worse. I mean, at this point, we need to start questioning on if they need to trade Trae Young, because they keep trying things centered around him and it's not working. In my opinion, Trae needs to go to a team where he'll be the second option. It would never happen, but if the Hawks did try and move on from Trae, it'd be tough because most of the teams he could go to, he wouldn't be a second option. But I think the Nets, Pelicans, Magic, and even Bulls would be worth looking into. To be more realistic though, if the Hawks were going to make a major move, it would probably be to trade DeJounte Murray. And if they did, he could honestly end up anywhere, because as a two-way player that's elite on defense, is shooting nearly 40% from three and can play either point guard or shooting guard, well, who wouldn't want him? I know the New York Knicks shouldn't want Julius Randle anymore. But before that, I want to give a shout out to today's sponsor, Ada. The colder months are coming up, which means COVID-19 cases could be on the rise. And with everyone likely to be spending more time indoors or with friends and family during the holidays, it's important to know that there are now treatments available for COVID-19. There are now treatments available for COVID-19 if you are or know someone who has a high risk of getting severe COVID-19. All you need to do to see if you're at high risk of severe COVID-19 and eligible for those treatments is check out Ada's eligibility questionnaire. It's a short and free series of questions that may allow you to talk to a clinician via telehealth within 2 hours to receive guidance on the next possible steps. And it's convenient too, because if prescribed, you can pick up treatment from your local pharmacy. With a sickness that still has some unknowns, it's best to get as many answers as possible ahead of time, so you're well prepared if you or anyone you know catches it. So thank you again to Ada for sponsoring today's video. Once again, make sure to take Ada's free health questionnaire to learn if you're at high risk of developing severe COVID-19, and find out if you're eligible for treatment by following my link in the description. Now let's get back to the video. I'm sorry, but Randle's a bad player. It's him giving up on plays, forcing bad shots, not knowing how to get out of a double team, having terrible shooting nights, and having the crazy mindset that he's still the leader of that team. He's a bad player all around, and honestly, I don't see any team in the league wanting to trade for him. The only hope I see for the Knicks is trying to get the Charlotte Hornets excited about trading for him, because it just seems like something they do. Just request PJ Washington and any 2 other players in return for him, and they're set. I did just mention Zach LaVine in a trade proposal, and it makes sense. His name's been thrown around a lot recently. Personally, I think the Bulls should have blown their entire team up a long time ago and should still do it right now, but it's not looking like it, so we're just gonna focus on Zach. And there's so many teams that could use his services: the Magic, Hornets, Heat, Nets, Pelicans, Knicks, Raptors. So I'm just gonna give a couple of my favorite trade ideas. And I don't usually like talking about trades to the Lakers, but one here could make a lot of sense. The Lakers could bring in a ton of extra scoring and potential to their team by getting Zach LaVine in a deal centered around guys like D'Angelo Russell, Rui Hachimura, and Gabe Vincent. The Bulls could use more help on defense, and guys like Rui and Gabe that LA hasn't even been using could make big differences. And sure, D'Angelo's LA starting point guard right now, but they really wouldn't miss him that much. I just don't know if the Bulls would even want him in this deal. But either way, of course, LA could throw in a draft pick here to make everything else even. Not the greatest deal, but I could see it happening. The Orlando Magic are finally pretty good these days, so they should make a deal to take them to that next level. And sending guys like Jalen Suggs, Gary Harris, and Jonathan Isaac to Chicago could give them another star on their team to be their leader. The Magic has so many talented young players right now that it's time for them to make a deal like this one. Nearly every single team in the league should want to trade for guys like OG Anunoby and Pascal Siakam, but Toronto waited so long to make a move that now both guys are in the last year of their contract. And no team in the league is going to trade what the Raptors want to get a player that'll be a free agent this summer. Interestingly enough, Donovan Mitchell decided not to sign an extension with the Cavs, which means he'll probably end up getting traded again. And there are 3 perfect destinations for him in the Heat, Knicks, or Nets. All 3 teams could use and have been patiently waiting for another superstar to join, and all of them have tried to trade for one in the past, but it just hasn't worked out. The Heat have players like Tyler Hero and Nikola Jovic to trade, the Knicks have RJ Barrett and Evan Fournier, and the Nets have Royce O'Neal, Cam Johnson, and plenty more for a deal. I think he'd prefer to go to a New York team because that's where he's from, and he was pretty excited when he thought he was joining the Knicks, but it's up to the Cavs at the end of the day, so it's something to keep your eyes on. The Washington Wizards need to trade either Jordan Poole or Kyle Kuzma. We just can't have these 2 guys on the same team together. Their personalities, egos, and work ethics is definitely not something you want leading a franchise, so I'd say Kuzma's gotta go. And I think on the right team, he'd be the perfect third option type of player, which is why it's so hard to predict where he could end up. But I'd say teams like the Pistons, Knicks, and Kings should all have their eyes on him. And if Washington could get a veteran player to keep Jordan Poole in place, then that'd be even better. But speaking of things that teams desperately need, the Pelicans still desperately need a real point guard. Playing CJ McCollum there just isn't a great look. And having Brandon Ingram on the team, I don't think it's been what they expected. He's never really made a major impact since joining them, so I think they should trade him away and use what value they can get for him elsewhere. There's no lack of small forwards in the league right now, so it's tough for him to find a new home, but looking across it, I think the best fit right now could be the Memphis Grizzlies. They have no real small forward, and Brandon could be sent there in a deal revolving around Marcus Smart. It would give Memphis more offense to try to turn their season around, and it would give New Orleans a much needed point guard. Of course, Smart's not the perfect type of point guard they'd need, but he'd be better than nothing. Then we move over to the Utah Jazz. Apparently, John Collins and Lauri Markkanen both could be on the move for very different reasons. Collins isn't playing well enough, and Lauri may be playing too well for where the Utah Jazz want to be right now in their rebuild. It's tough though, because John Collins is getting paid $25 million a year to average 14 a game. If I'm the Jazz though, I'm trying to send him to a team like Portland, Washington, or the Hornets who don't have much going on, because they may get lucky if he ever turns things back around. As for Markkanen, now this is where things get interesting, because if they decide to trade him, they have options. The first would be to the OKC Thunder. Obviously, I don't need to go into detail on what assets OKC has to offer, but if they could use a lot of them to bring in Lauri and insert him into their starting lineup, it'd be perfect. He's the right age to fit in with the rest of the roster, and it would give the Thunder another superstar to pair with Shea. There are other teams out there though. For example, I've been hesitant to include the 76ers in any of these scenarios because they've been doing so well, but if they could trade guys like Marcus Morris or Tobias Harris to match salaries, then send multiple first-round picks to Utah and get Markkanen in return to pair with Embiid, that'd be pretty interesting. One last team I have to throw in the mix though is the Portland Trailblazers, because they have guys like Malcolm Brogdon and Jeremy Grant wasting away some valuable prime years. And I think if you're a team like the Miami Heat, Brogdon's a guy you gotta be looking at. I really don't think this team wants to keep starting Kyle Lowry, and Brogdon was putting up 21 a game for Indiana just a couple of seasons ago. He'd be a major scoring boost for the Heat, which they could always use, while at the same time they have plenty of trade assets and draft picks to send over to get the deal done. Now Jeremy Grant's a little overpaid, but a young team who has money to spend and could desperately use his defense is one that I mentioned earlier in the Indiana Pacers. I mean, they have by far the worst defense in the league, and Grant's an Aaron Gordon type player on defense, but much better on offense. Plus the fact that he's only 29 and on a long-term deal might make him a little bit more enticing for the Pacers. And of course, their entire roster is made up of trade assets that could be used in a deal to make the Blazers happy. If not them, maybe look at the Mavericks to try to make a move here. What's an NBA trade you most want to see happen this year before the deadline? Comment down below and let me know.